Yes, you read that correctly. You share the same morality as a Nazi. You also share the same morality as an Aztec who practiced human sacrifice. And that political party you can't stand, they operate on your same moral foundations too. The point is simple and we'll prove it in this video. Every human being starts from the same core moral principles. But how on earth do we share the same morality as a Nazi? In this video, we'll break that down. We'll explain the difference between moral principles and the facts that shape moral decisions, how you could have believed and went along with what the Nazis believed, why even if we have shared moral principles, we still disagree on moral issues today, how evolution may fit into all of this, and what religion has to say about it. But let's first take a minute to define what is moral truth, and then we'll get into the juicy stuff. Objective morality is a set of rational moral constraints on human behavior that necessarily follow from the nature of human beings, what humans are, and the causal structure of reality, how this world works. What does that mean in normal language? Just like there are better and worse ways to build a bridge because of truths like physics, gravity, tension, there are also better and worse ways for humans to treat each other. Why? Because of how trust works, how cooperation works, how harm spreads, how society survives. Objective truth holds that these patterns aren't just invented by culture. They're actually built into human nature and the causal structure of reality. You can think of it like this. Truths like arsenic poisons humans and fire burns skin are only relevant when humans actually exist. But the chemical and physical forces that make those truths true exist long before humans ever appeared. Objective morality works the same way. The moral truths only matter because humans exist, but the deeper features of reality that make those truths true existed before we came. Now, before we get into the philosophy, I first want to preempt you with some science and anthropology, because if I don't, I'm worried that you may find what I say in the philosophy part just impossible. All the studies that I mentioned are linked in the description. Across every well-documented human society we've ever studied, hunter-gatherers, pastoralists, early chiefdoms, ancient states, and groups that existed long before colonialism, the same pattern keeps showing up. In every society, humans punish wrongful killings, condemn stealing from the group. In every society, they value fairness, reward cooperation, and enforce some kind of justice. These represent some of the strongest findings in anthropology. When you look at cross-cultural data sets, representing hundreds of societies before outside influence, every society with adequate data shows, again, norms against unlawful killing and norms against unauthorized taking of valued possessions. No clear counterexample has ever been found. Anthropologist Donald E. Brown even wrote a book on human universals. He lists things like murder prescribed, property, law, redress of wrongs. He lists these as found in all human societies. Thus, we have growing evidence that there is a species-wide moral architecture. Recently, researchers wanted to delve even further, and in a large study of 60 societies, they found that cooperative behaviors were always judged as morally good. They then followed this up with 256 societies, and they found the same result. But maybe even more telling, though, is that no culture identified any of those cooperative norms as bad or immoral. And not even just across societies, but even in like small groups. Ethnographies of tiny hunter-gatherer bands described capital punishment or killing of persistent murderers, serious sanctions of theft, shaming and exclusion of free riders, third-party mediation of disputes, and strict expectations of fair sharing. Even in the smallest groups on Earth, anything goes does not exist. But it goes even deeper than anthropology. We can see this moral structure in infants. Just as we humans are pre-wired to learn language and basic numerical patterns, mathematics, there is growing evidence that humans also come pre-wired with an innate moral sense. Infants who can't speak or walk yet show clear preferences for helpers over hinderers in puppet experiments. By the way, chimpanzees don't. And by their second year, they expect resources to be divided fairly. Developmental psychologists emphasize that we may have this moral skeleton that culture later fills in with specifics. So if we put all of this together, the simplest conclusion is this. Morality is not invented by scratch from culture, or else we would see clear deviations from those norms we identified earlier. It appears that humans share a built-in framework for understanding harm, fairness, help, reciprocity, and legitimate versus illegitimate taking. Now there's 2 points I want to make clear before we move on to the Nazis. Just because everybody agrees on something doesn't mean that that thing is true. What we are saying, though, is that if everybody agrees on something, there must be compelling evidence for us to reject what everybody agrees on. If somebody's going to disagree, the burden of proof is on them to show us why the truth that everybody agrees on is wrong. So far, nobody has presented any compelling evidence for why those core moral principles are false. Further, a person can't use moral relativism, as we, in this video, show that that's an irrational position to take. And the second point before we move on, when I say that everyone shares the same morality, I don't mean that people always follow this shared morality. We all know humans have impulses like anger, fear, desire, greed that push us to violate the morality that we inherently believe. In this video, we're not talking about those personal failures. What we are talking about, though, are those big organized evils in history, like genocides, witch trials, crusades, where the perpetrators sincerely believed that they were doing something good. So now we come to the pulp of our argument. And I must give credit, I first heard this from Dr. Rabbi David Gottlieb, who used to be a philosophy professor at Johns Hopkins University. And here it is. Every human shares the same basic moral principles. What makes people differ is not their morality, but the facts that they believe. Two societies can agree on moral principles, but come to wildly different conclusions because their beliefs are different. For example, many people assume that the Nazis had different morals from the rest of us. But that's not actually true. They had a lot of the same core moral principles that we outlined earlier. Things like stop threats to society, protect the vulnerable, punish the wicked, reward the good, be loyal to your group. The problem wasn't their moral principles, it was their beliefs about reality. The Nazis believed, falsely of course, that Jews were not innocent individuals. Jews were a biological threat to society. Jews were responsible for Germany's economic collapse and all of their governmental failures. That these Jews controlled global finance and secretly harmed Germans. In essence, these Jews were a disease infecting the body of the nation. So, simply, the Nazis believed that the Jews were the enemy of mankind. Therefore, killing the enemy of mankind is self-defense. We're just merely protecting ourselves. We're protecting our family, we're protecting our society, we're protecting the future. Surely we all agree that everybody has a right to self-defense. Doesn't this sound plausible? For example, why didn't the Nazis say that the Jews were great and kind people, and we just had to kill them anyway? Because obviously that would conflict with the moral core of our humanity. People would realize the flaw instantly. So the Nazis weren't driven by pure evil. They were driven by moral principles applied to a fantasy world of lies. We can also take the Aztecs and human sacrifice. Many people assume that the Aztecs must have had different moral principles because of their practice of human sacrifice. Who would sacrifice humans? But again, they shared the same core morality as you. They just believed different facts about reality. Here's what they believed. The sun god needed human blood to rise each day. Thus, without sacrifice in human blood, the world would literally collapse. So failing to offer this blood would lead to cosmic darkness, famine, and the extinction of all humanity. Therefore, sacrifice was the highest form of generosity that a person could take for their society. Obviously, these facts were wrong. But if you truly believed what they believed, that if we don't sacrifice somebody today, the sun will fail and every human being will die, your moral principles would likely push you to a similar conclusion. They want to protect the community, preserve the world, prevent mass suffering, do what is necessary to avoid disaster. Again, humans share common moral principles, but just differ on the facts. As far as I'm aware, we can apply this formula to every major evil event in history. The people that we think are evil usually think that they themselves are good. Psychology even backs this up. Cognitive dissonance tells us that humans can't tolerate seeing themselves as immoral. So when their actions clash with their principles, they don't abandon the principles. They just rewrite the facts to justify their actions. But why is there so much political debate today about moral issues if we all share the same core moral principles? Well, like I said earlier, they usually differ on the facts or in which moral principle they prioritize and how much they prioritize it. And we can know when people will disagree. For example, everyone agrees with simple moral statements like, it's wrong to torture small, innocent children for fun. These universally agreed upon statements usually involve one moral principle and no competing moral principle. For these, people universally agree. Another example is it's wrong to kill innocent people. We all agree. Disagreement only arises when moral principles collide, when we start to introduce more than one moral principle. For example, people will disagree on whether it's wrong to steal medicine to save a dying patient. Two moral principles colliding. Or whether it's wrong to torture one small innocent child to save 10 other children. Two moral principles colliding. People disagree because they weigh these moral principles differently. A current modern example of factual disagreement is abortion. Everybody agrees on the following. Unjustified murder is wrong. We should prevent unnecessary suffering and harm. We should promote well-being. People don't disagree on these principles, but they do disagree on the facts and the priorities of each principle. Disregarding religion, some people view the fetus as a human life. Thus, they think killing the fetus is akin to murder. Others have a different belief. They believe that this fetus is not a full human life, so the priorities of preventing suffering and harm to the mother and promoting well-being to the mother are stacked above the unjustified killing. Both sides share the same core moral principles, but just differ on the facts, what is a human life, and what moral principles they prioritize. So by this point, we've seen compelling evidence that humans possess an innate moral structure. We have a built-in capacity to recognize good and evil. At this point, the skeptic's reply is typically, the only reason humans value cooperation, fairness, loyalty, harm avoidance is because those behaviors helped our ancestors survive. Evolution shaped our moral intuitions. So morality at the end of the day isn't really true. It's just adaptive. Here's our response. If we assume evolution is true, yes, our moral intuitions helped our ancestors survive. But the leap from evolution shaped our moral intuitions to therefore they can't be true is a mistake. The skeptic assumes that if something evolved, it can't be tracking an objective truth. But we can show that that assumption is false. Evolution routinely gives organisms accurate detectors of real features in the world. Why? Because accurate detectors increase survival. For example, we evolved the ability to perceive cause and effect, but that doesn't mean physics is unreal. We also evolved to see edges, depth, and motion, but that doesn't mean the external world is unreal. We also evolved to track quantity, but that doesn't make mathematics unreal. We evolved eyes to see light. That doesn't mean that the light isn't real. Now granted, our perceptions aren't perfect, but they're reliable enough. The same applies to morality. Assuming evolution is true, human beings evolved to track cooperation, harm, fairness, and social stability, because those patterns are part of how human life actually functions. You can't build a stable society by ignoring these, just like you can't build a stable bridge by ignoring gravity. So yes, you can say that evolution shaped our moral sense, but just because we evolved to detect something doesn't mean that that thing isn't real. Those moral patterns determine human flourishing. Now this all kind of seems kind of secular. Does any of this go against religion? From what I've found, the answer is actually no. Judaism long expected science to discover this stuff. Many of the greatest Jewish philosophers like the Sajagan, Maimonides, the Sefer HaChanukh, Rav Hirsch, they all argued that human beings were created with an innate moral capacity. We are born with the ability to recognize good and evil because our nature reflects the will of our Creator. And reason itself points in the same direction. Like we delved more deeply in this video, reason says that an intelligible created thing must have been created by a creator who is intelligible. Thus, our world points to an intelligent creator. If our human nature is ultimately created, then our moral intuitions aren't random. They are part of the design and will of the creator. Thus, Judaism takes it beyond pure nature. Cooperation isn't just adaptive. Fairness isn't just useful, and justice isn't just convenient for our society, but further, they are ways that the Creator intended for human beings to live, because they reflect the objective moral order that is built into creation. Our human moral intuition exists, therefore, so that we can detect the order and live in alignment with it. To close, we've covered a lot. Science and anthropology show that at the core, all humans share the same moral principles. These findings help explain the horrible atrocities that we see throughout history, and also the, what appears to us like, savage-like behavior of our ancestors. Judaism has long held this view, that there are certain rational precepts that all humans can directly perceive, and that it is the will of God that we follow them. I hope you know, though, that I'm not dismissing bad actions. Actions can be bad independent of belief. In fact, in a future video, we will delve into whether one can be good without God. So subscribe to stay tuned. But I do hope that this video helps you better understand that we as humans aren't that radically different from each other. Sure, culture, race, society, genetics will influence us to a large extent, but there is still that same image of God dwelling in each of us, that same moral core of humanity. If you have made it this far, I hope you enjoyed, and I sincerely thank you for sticking with me and watching.